In a single becalmed week of the Spanish Main, 23 men aboard the stranded sloop drank the unnameable. Only 9 walked ashore 40 days later, and this is how the other 14 were quietly forgotten. 40 days without rain or mercy. Your tongue thickens until it will not fit behind your teeth. Imagine the sun rising over a mirror of salt water you cannot drink, adrift between Windward Passage and Bahamas. Under the black flag, this was not legend but routine, and the truth is darker than Hollywood ever showed. What kept these men alive was not courage. We must return to the world that made them. The Golden Age of Piracy stretched from 1650 to 1720. 7 decades of plunder and violence. Treaty breaking carved across the Caribbean, the Atlantic seaboard, and the trade winds carrying Spanish silver towards Seville. It was a world of wooden hulls and iron discipline, of quartermasters, captains, and oaths sworn on cutlasses. Articles were signed in candlelight, and the blood-soaked ports were few but famous, Nassau chief among them. Nassau on New Providence became a lawless republic where 8,000 pirates lived without governor or garrison. Tortuga, off the northern coast of Hispaniola, sheltered the ruthless buccaneers of an earlier and bloodier generation. Port Royal, before the earthquake of 1692 swallowed half of it, was called the wickedest city on earth. From these harbors, sloops and brigantines slipped out under sail, chasing merchantmen laden with sugar, tobacco, indigo, coin. The stakes were plunder, but the enemies were older than any navy. Scurvy hollowed out gums and loosened teeth. Yellow fever emptied whole crews in a week. Dead calm held ships motionless for days on windless, glassy water. And of every terror a pirate faced, one loomed above all others. Water. Fresh water on the open sea. Water was more precious than gold aboard any vessel. Gold could wait. First could not. Every barrel was counted. Every leak was mourned. The quartermaster measured rations by wooden dipper as each man watched with hollow, jealous eyes. One barrel decided who lived and who did not. Here begins the central paradox of the endless sea. A man stood on deck, surrounded by ocean to the horizon, and could die of dryness within 1 week. The waters of the Caribbean glittered blue and endless, yet a single mouthful of them was pure poison. Sea water carries roughly 35 grams of salt in every liter. The human kidney processes only a fraction of that. To flush the salt, the body must draw more water from its own tissues than the drink first provided. Drinking the sea does not quench thirst, it accelerates the dying. Within 3 days, a man begins to hallucinate. Within 5 days, his organs fail. Within 7, he is a corpse sewn into sailcloth and slid overboard. And yet, the record shows something impossible. Ship's logs, admiralty depositions, and smuggled letters describe voyages beyond reason. Crews endured 20, 30, even 40 days without proper water, and lived to walk ashore under sun.
By every rule of physiology, this should not happen. Yet ship's logs recorded happening again and again. To survive, the first weapon was discipline. Discipline began with the quartermaster, second in power only to the captain. Elected by the crew, he divided the plunder. And, above all, he controlled the water aboard the vessel. Each morning he unlocked the scuttlebutt, the cask fixed near the mainmast, and measured out the daily allowance. In fair weather, the ration was 1 pint per man, half a liter beneath the tropical sun, but survivable. When the winds failed and the barrels sounded hollow, the pint became half a pint, then a quarter, then a thimble no wider than a musket ball, poured onto the tongue with a wooden spoon. Men licked the wooden dippers dry. They ran their fingers along the inside of empty cups, mad with thirst. They begged the quartermaster for one more swallow, and the quartermaster, if he was wise, always refused. To stretch what remained, water was cut with rum, with vinegar, with the brackish dregs of green, rotting casks. A drink called grog.
1 part rum to 4 parts water, was rationed twice each brutal day. Vinegar mixed with brine was believed to prevent scurvy. Neither was pleasant. Both, in truth, only delayed death. The casks themselves were part of the problem. Wooden staves, iron hoops, sealed with brittle pine tar. They were breeding grounds for algae, worms, and rot. Clear water could ferment within 2 weeks into green sludge. Sailors strained the sludge through their teeth. They held their breath. And still they drank. Nothing else remained. The hierarchy of first was strict as any court. The captain kept a private stock locked in his cabin. Officers drew their ration first, then the gunners, the boatswain, and the carpenter, then the ordinary hands below, and last of all, the powder monkeys. Boys of 10 or 12 who ran gunpowder to the cannons in battle. When the casks ran dry, older methods returned, some born of desperate ingenuity, some older than any flag. At dawn, when tropical air met the cool of night, condensation gathered on the sailcloth stretched above the deck. Pirates woke before sunrise to sponge the canvas, wringing perhaps a spoonful of dew per square foot of cloth. It was work for hours, and it yielded almost nothing, but almost nothing was better than nothing at all. Men chewed lead musket balls to keep their mouths salivating. The metal itself did not help their thirst. It slowly poisoned them, though few lived long enough to feel the harm creeping through their weary blood.
Sucking on a hard, round object triggered the salivary glands, offering the frail illusion of moisture on parched tongues. Others chewed strips of hard leather, brass buttons, coins, anything to trick the body into believing it was fed. When sea turtles were caught, prized above any provision, the crew drank the warm blood first from the shell. Turtle blood runs warm and thick, low in salt. A single large turtle could give a pint per man. Fish were split along the spine, and the clear fluid within the spinal column was drained into waiting cups. Even the eyes of a fresh-caught tuna were sucked for the small pocket of moisture behind the lens. The most desperate crews attempted distillation, a copper pot sealed with a wooden lid set over the galley fire. Seawater boiled violently inside. Steam rose through a slender pewter tube and condensed into a waiting glass jar below. The result was a thin, brackish trickle, perhaps a single cup for every gallon of precious firewood burned. It cost hours of vigilant labor and dwindling fuel, yet it kept desperate men alive another day. And then, salvation. When black clouds finally broke over the horizon and heavy drops slapped the deck. Grown men wept and knelt and opened their cracked mouths to the sky, drinking down the falling rain. Sailcloth was spread and channeled into every cask. Boots were filled, hats were filled, boots were drunk from. One good tropical rainstorm could refill a ship's stores for weeks, a moment called, without exaggeration, deliverance. Still, when the sky refused, some crews resorted to what the black articles of the code strictly forbade. Now consider the myth. Hollywood shows us pirates as swashbucklers, bright shirts, gold teeth, rum, and cutlass raised. Laughing, dancing, singing shanties in rings of firelight. The image the whole 20th century sold the world. It is a costume stitched from ignorance. It is not the sun-blackened corpse lying beneath the painted legend. The reality of 40 days without water is not romantic. The skin blackens where the sun strikes it, cracking into fissures that will not close. The lips split from corner to corner across parched, ruined faces. The tongue swells until it protrudes between the teeth, dark and dry as old leather left in salt. The eyes sink deep into hollow sockets, the flesh drawn tight over bone by the relentless equatorial thirst.
Urine, when it comes at all, is the color of strong tea and burns the flesh like acid. The voice fails first, then the balance, then the mind gives way beneath the black flag's long shadow. Sailors adrift in tropical heat report seeing green shorelines that are not there, palm trees rising from empty water, fresh streams pouring down cliffs of cloud. Some climb the rigging to reach them, some walk over the rail. Hallucination is the body's last mercy before it stops working. The myth of pirate bravado inverts on itself. No bravado in a man too weak to lift a bucket. No swagger in a mouth unable to form words. Men who survived 40 days without water did not endure through bravery. They endured because they were ruthless.
Fortune favored the ruthless, not the brave, and the worst decisions were always made on day 30. History preserves those decisions only in fragments, hidden between the lines of court testimony and burnt correspondence. The pirate ships rarely kept full logs, and their swift sloops most often vanished without any surviving written record. But merchant vessels and whale ships kept careful accounts. What those pages describe is what the sea has always demanded. In 1765, the merchantman Peggy, sailing out of the Azores, was dismasted in a savage winter storm. Her crew exhausted provisions within weeks. When the last biscuit vanished and the final cask ran dry, they drew lots. The shortest straw fell to the enslaved African cook. He was killed by his crewmates and then eaten aboard. The rest were rescued days later, half mad, half dead, and refusing forever to speak of what had happened aboard. In 1710, the Nottingham galley shattered upon a lonely rock off the frozen coast of Maine. 10 men clung to a granite island in freezing spray. When the carpenter perished, survivors carried him for meat. The captain's later account was defensive, pious, and half a lie, and everyone at the Admiralty already knew.
The Essex whale ship rammed by a sperm whale in the Pacific of 1820 gave the world Moby Dick. Her crew drifted for 90 days. 8 of 20 men lived. They too drew lots and ate their dead. When the Nantucket owners heard the truth, they hushed the survivors and paid them off in silent Yankee coin. These incidents entered the record, but pirates operating outside the law left almost no such documents behind them. Their sloops vanished, their crews scattered. The custom of the sea was silently observed and never written in ink. That unspoken pact, a starving crew might draw lots and consume the loser, it happened. Everyone knew. But one crew under the black flag reached day 40 adrift and somehow lived to tell of it. Return now to the sloop we began with. 70 tons, 23 men, becalmed between Cuba and Hispaniola. She had chased a Spanish flotilla and taken a small prize. And then, without warning, the wind died. For 6 days the sails hung slack.
The sun rose and set through unmoving, breathless tropical air. By the 7th day, the water casks stood half full. By the 14th, everyone was empty. By the 20th day, the first man died, slid over the rail without ceremony, because ceremony required breath. By the 30th day, the crew was 10. The rest lay below in the fetid dark, breathing shallow, waiting. The quartermaster kept order with a cocked pistol. The captain wrote in his log with trembling, ink-thin fingers. His last entry read only, "God spare us, or take us swiftly." The sloop drifted onward beneath silent stars. On the 34th day, the horizon darkened. A squall line, black and vast, rolled up from the southeast. It came too late for 4 men who died the night before. For the survivors, it came in time. Sailcloth spread, casks opened. The rain fell 2 hours, and every man who could crawl, crawled to catch it. 6 days later, an English merchantman sighted the sloop drifting under jury-rigged sail beneath a leaden sky. She hauled alongside. 9 men were carried aboard on stretchers of rope, skeletal, silent, barely alive on deck. The merchant captain wrote in his log the sloop's hold was empty and turtle bones littered her deck. There were rumors in Kingston taverns that the sloop had carried 37 men when the calm began, not 23. Rumors whispered the difference had been consumed. There is no proof, only silence about what filled their bellies. What they carried home was worse than first. The 9 survivors did not speak of the voyage aboard. 2 hanged themselves within the year. 3 drank themselves into graves. 1 returned to piracy, dying of the Carolinas. 1 became a Virginia preacher, refusing salt water forever. 2 vanished into colonial ports, changing names and trades. The admiralty courts had reason to bury these accounts. To publish them was to invite panic in merchant crews, mutiny in naval companies, and questions in Parliament about the conditions of seagoing men under the Black Flag. The Royal Navy quietly rewrote its water discipline. By 1740, every warship carried a distillation apparatus aboard. By 1800, the daily ration of water was fixed by regulation, not custom, across every royal fleet. The lessons of the sloop of the Windward Passage were learned. They were simply never credited to her death. This is the truth behind the myth. The Golden Age of Piracy was not freedom. It was thirst. It was wrought in wooden casks, salt on cracking clips, and the quartermaster's dipper measuring life by drops. The captain's locked cabinet and the small brown boys who died first because they always drank last. Pop culture erased the dying and kept the flag, kept the parrot, kept the gleaming treasure chest. It threw away the swollen tongues, the sunken eyes, the boys buried at sea before their fathers noticed. But the ocean remembers what men forget. The bones of thirsty pirates lie scattered from Bermuda to Barbados. Becalmed sloops rest under coral, and the record waits, thin as ink on parchment, in the archives of Seville. The men who lived 40 days without water did not survive by song, nor by luck, but by discipline. Discipline that shaded into cruelty, ingenuity that shaded into horror, choices no maritime code ever dared to record. They survived because they were ruthless, and ruthlessness at sea is often the only virtue a man has left. One captain's fate still waits to be told. His name appears in 3 depositions and 1 Spanish naval report. He commanded a sloop of 6 guns, 40 hands, last seen alive in 1717, sailing east from Nassau, bound toward the Middle Passage. What became of him is a story darker than any we have told tonight. If you want to know how the next captain met his end, the next video is already waiting. Subscribe and raise the black flag with us. There are more stories beneath